Good afternoon and welcome to episode 8 of Inside Out, a monthly webcast where Thinka's co-founders and respective CEO and CEO, Ben and Lee, talk through all the weird and wonderful, hard and human parts of business and leadership. This month, it's a special focus on the performance perception gap, and we're focusing on two questions. Why do employees often rate their own performance better than how their leaders rate them? And why is the performance perception gap a common phenomenon?
This is something that we've been looking at as a business for quite a period of time, and we've got a lot of data around what this gap actually looks like. But first of all, let's just clarify, when we say performance perception gap, what is it? Essentially, it is the gap between how the employee views their performance versus how their leader views their performance. So what is that gap? The current stat, it's about an 11% average, the performance perception gap currently is. So that is saying that leaders rate employees 11% lower on average than what the employee rates themselves in that current job role or that current skill or capability area.
It's interesting that the gap is wider at those more foundation levels, but it also speaks to that phenomenon of they don't know what they don't know. So they don't actually yet understand the skills they need to develop. So there is a tendency to kind of be more optimistic about where you are relative to that skill because you don't yet truly understand what it means to embody that skill.
And
So
so when we play that out,
Mhm.
they might say they're a great communicator, but until they actually see what it takes to deliver a great presentation, which is a key communication style, that gap could exist because they think they're already great at communicating, but really when they get into the warts and all of it, the gap is wider because the
Yeah.
understanding of what it actually took wasn't there.
Yeah. And I think the key to that is understanding that skills are quite nuanced. So, for example, delivering a presentation versus delivering feedback versus being able to communicate in a difficult conversation versus giving a good briefing, like they're all communication skills, but they're all quite unique and different in and of themselves. So, the more and more I think you're exposed to the work environment, the more you start to understand that skills are multi-layered and you may be good in one particular area of that skill and not so great in another area.
So let's just talk more about that weakness piece because I think this is coming up more and more as we want to build great organizational culture. So a lot of the times organizations will start to really look at what a strength-based culture might look like and how we can use more strength-based language, but that really shouldn't be confused with being able to still have robust conversations. Otherwise, you're not having a strength-based culture, you're having a toxic positivity layer within your culture where we can't really have the honest conversation required to help navigate weakness. And yes, we don't want to get fixated on deficit or weakness. And sometimes in organizations, they even outlaw the word and they want to use, development opportunities or something else. But sometimes the candidness that comes with, hey, these are the areas where you're letting yourself down can be really powerful for an employee to actually hear, and it's how you deliver it. So there's such power in the leader's ability to communicate what that gap or that performance piece might actually be.
Perception is a global problem. It's not a problem that exists just within the organization. So, for example, there's some great stats from the research of Bobby Duffy in The Perils of Perception, a book that he wrote. And a couple of these key stats reveal that there is a big perception gap, often in societies. So, for example, in Britain, there's this belief that about 19% of the population experience teenage pregnancy, when in fact, only 1.4% of the population are teenage mothers. So, big perception gap there. And generally speaking, across the US and Britain, they believe the rate of immigration to be double the actual rate that it is. So, for whatever reason, sensationalist reporting, biases and stereotypes, your political beliefs, the way you've been raised, that can all influence how you see things. So, for example, if you've been raised in a family or a society that doesn't deal with hard stuff,
Yeah.
that doesn't really want to talk about where the problems are, what some of the challenges are, etc., and you kind of exist in this bubble of forced positivity. Going into a workplace means it can be a real eye-opener when you're faced with a difficult conversation because you really are inclined by nature to some degree and nurture to put this optimism bias on things. So sometimes it's not just the fact that there's a gap there. It's the fact that you've brought in a whole lot of other influences from outside that make it really difficult to interpret what your performance needs to be. I think one of the biggest biases in the research is this idea of having a self-serving bias. So, yes, I'm going to own the things that are great about my performance, but when it comes to the things that aren't so great, I'm going to blame external factors and I'm going to deflect and I'm going to try to avoid that conversation. And this isn't everyone, I understand that, but generally speaking, there is a tendency to bring in this self-serving bias, ego, insecurity, not wanting to kind of reveal too much about the self, particularly if you don't feel safe in those conversations. I'm not
Also, the point that you made before, like
Hmm.
around, I worked this hard for my period of time, so therefore you should as well, that kind of generational pass down effect, self-serving bias, like that's actually a form of
Self-serving bias.
yeah.
Yeah. So it can come in from both angles, but if it's coming in from the direct report angle, then the leader just stops a conversation and says, hey, before we go any further, let's talk about what these feedback conversations or performance conversations need to look like. Let us get on the same page about what your expectations are and what my expectations are, so that every conversation we have going forward, we're not hitting a brick wall and we're actually getting somewhere. I think having the courage to actually stop a conversation and not carry on, to tick a box, to lodge a form, to get it, through to management, is a really good sign of a leader that is invested in the growth and development of their direct.
I actually am a big advocate for a lot of performance review conversations or performance conversations being into halftime blocks. So always have got a chop out. Like you can have a really good conversation, then you can have a period of reflection. Maybe it's a couple of days between, and you come back together and you get clear on the actions and the outcomes. People, when they've heard something that might be critical about themselves, or they've had that moment of realization where they're not where they thought they actually were, they need a moment to process that. So even though you
Yeah,
might, as a
exactly.
leader, want to get the form done, or you might want to move it along, actually calling time out or having just two halftime blocks helps you get closer to the action in the second half and agreed on action rather than just the dirty yes, because I'm in a shitty mood now that I've heard that and I just want to get out of this conversation. So I'm just going to say yes, 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 yes. And then nothing happens for 12 months.
Yeah.
Cycle starts again. I love this ability to not get lost in self-awareness because you can actually get in your own head and it can be counterproductive. Helping people move into action is much more important. So we see this play out in various ways. And in fact, we've got a leader at Thinka who I would say is amazing at actually moving from not just being self-aware, but into self-management and then growing into new behavior.
Yeah, so this leader has been working on quite a lot of skills to balance the strategic and the operational parts of her role. So it's really requires quite a lot of cognitive flexibility. Any role, I think it does, let's be fair, but in leadership more so. So there's a self-awareness around, I know I need to grow this skill, but the self-management piece is what are the tactical things I can do to start demonstrating and stepping into cognitive flexibility. And it's a balance of self-reflection and understanding where the mistakes are being made and how to do better the next time, and also being open to receiving feedback. And I feel like that is the game changer. When you have a leader that is open to feedback, who doesn't resist, who enters into the conversation with that kind of nice dance that you do in really healthy feedback conversations, that's what moves performance, is that ability to just surrender to the feedback, good, bad, or otherwise. Yes, leaders are sometimes going to give shitty feedback or feedback that you don't agree with, but it's still feedback nonetheless. It's useful information and you take what you need from it and you augment your role accordingly. As I said, it's always a negotiation. You take what you need and you leave the rest, but you don't disregard it altogether because there's one part of it that you don't like.
I think the ability for individuals to be able to, again, have that own self-awareness, self-management cycle is important, but leaders who actually got skills beyond the what and the why, how do I have great conversations? How do I actually have a robust psychological safety within my team is critically important in this modern work context.
And I think also just making sure that the tools we do have, not that we're really focused on those today, but job descriptions, competency frameworks, KPIs, all of them they aren't absolute. Like they still require negotiation because interpretation of them is different between the direct report and the leader. So entering into conversations, okay, so here's this competency. Tell me what you think it means. Let's look at the behaviors in your role that reflect this competency. What are the actions? What do we need to do here to realize the competency to its full potential? Like that kind of conversation is really important, and it's up to the leader to really bring that to light and make it feel real for the person. So it's personalizing their development. Don't just bring in a framework, shove it in their face and go, this is what I need you to do, because it doesn't
Not going
really
to do the
do
job.
anything.
Yeah. You've got to be able to tell the story, bring it to life, provide examples, and then talk about evidence. This is where I've seen it work.
Evidence,
It didn't
exactly.
work. Evidence, not opinion.